We've had almost 2 years of social distancing and shutting down the vital components of what is at the heart of community, such as parks, trails, cafes, community centers, events, and social gatherings. As we look together as a nation to recover from the effects of the pandemic, we find ourselves at a unique crossroad in time. We are now faced with finding solutions to reconnecting our communities again. We recently brought together almost 500 people from across Canada to our online RECONNECT Making Communities Essential event. Over 2.5 days, we had a series of keynote presentations and masterclasses to discuss how we're going to rebuild social connection after the COVID pandemic. Thank you for joining me, Heather Keem from the Tamarack Institute, for one of 6 discussions that we've had about RECONNECT, making our communities essential. In this discussion, Melanie Goodchild, Anishinaabe, talks about reconnecting to fulfill the 8th prophecy. This discussion explores the times we live in as a fulfillment of the Anishinaabe 8th fire prophecy. If we are to light the 8th fire together, we need to cultivate our capacities for deep systems awareness and relational intelligence. Melanie explores this through the mindful practice of tea ceremony. As a bonus, we've also shared comments and inspiration from participants to deepen the conversation.
So I'm going to share a video, a very short video about some of the work I do. I'm, as Lori mentioned, the founder of Turtle Island Institute.
Our actions have caused harm to the earth, and without her we can't live. Surely we can wake up and remember how to do well.
A lot of people in the society that we live in view life as we're beyond, we're above nature and below nature, when in actual reality we're just part of nature.
In our ancestral ways of navigating the world, we understood the interconnected web of life and our sacred place and responsibility in creation.
And as soon as we start looking at how we live with nature, we can learn so much.
For us, it's a spiritual process. There's elements of healing. I think that's the kind of the medicine of Turtle Island Institute.
We can no longer wait to have people do things for us. It all goes back to identity. Do I know who I am, and do I know where I'm going to and how I'm supposed to get there?
And in studying things like resilience and complexity, I was trying to find a way to bring the soul, the spirit, and decolonize that work. And so I'm going to talk to you today for a little bit about how we've been doing that, particularly when the pandemic has arrived, and doing these types of gatherings on Zoom. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the medicine that we use, the mushkiki, that we've been using. And for that, I will be drinking a bowl of tea. And I will explain why I'm drinking a bowl of tea and how that comes about. So I was born in 1971, and from the time I was born, my mom, who went to Roman Catholic Indian Day School and her reserve, and my dad, who went to Spanish Indian Residential School, instilled in me a pretty fierce pride in who I was. Back in the day, I just knew I was an Ojibwe Indian, and those are my baby moccasins. And they're well worn, my mom says. I used to wear them all the time. And thinking about and just acknowledging and recognizing the babies that their graves were uncovered recently, and the mass burial sites, that for the children who didn't come home, I think about how precious it is to have these memories that I have of being home. So I'm the first generation that didn't attend residential school in my family. And so that always helps me ground myself and helps me remember how privileged I am, really, to be pursuing an education. I'm the first in my family to look at receiving a PhD. And I'm writing about Anishinaabe, Ketegaunseebee. And so this presentation teaches you a little bit about our way of life and our culture. So the eighth fire prophecy, there's a prophecy that our ancestors had foretold, and it's coming true now. And it's very humbling to think that we're living in a time together where this prophecy is coming true. The prophecy is that the human beings, that we would all come to a fork in the road, and we would choose to change our course, that we would shift our course of behavior and how we were interacting and being in relationship with Shkakamakwea Ki, our Earth Mother, Mother Earth. The Hopi prophecy talks about this as well, and Haudenosaunee prophecies. And so the eighth fire prophecy foretold that there would be a time when we human beings would be called the Ashkemadizig, the new people. The Ashkemadizig, the new people, are those who would decolonize, who would pursue a re-enchantment, I think, of the world. I like that. There's been a disenchantment coming out of the Enlightenment thinking and scientific rationality. And while there's a place for that, it had become so dominant that all of us, who are all indigenous to Mother Earth, that we would lose touch with those spiritual ways of understanding the world and understanding our place in it, our sacred place in it.
Participant reflection. Disenchantment. Brilliant way to understand the loss of the spirit in the industrial world.
Our elders talk about Ketegaunseebee. So we don't have a word for environment or biosphere or nature or wilderness. We have a word for land, Aki, but when we say Ketegaunseebee, it means everything, everything in creation. The sun, the moon, the stars, the trees, the water, the mountains, the deserts, the animals, the ones with wings, the birds. In the Haudenosaunee, words that come before all else, they acknowledge all of these. If you've ever heard the chance to hear the elders give the Thanksgiving address. And so this is really the eighth fire prophecy as a resurgence of our spirit-based ways of being. And it's for all of us. It's for the people from all four directions. So in our sacred medicine wheel teaching, we have four colors: red, white, black, yellow. That represents the four great nations from the four directions of the world. This is before our people saw that there were other people, which you might call the great races of the world. That there would be people coming to us with a different language, with different culture and different teachings. The Ashkemadizig are the people who would reach, I think the way I've described it in some of my work and in the way I understand this prophecy, is that we would reach a place of spiritual and emotional maturity and integrity to be able to relate to one another as human beings, which are spirit beings on a human journey. So prophecy comes from places, and indigenous knowledge, Nishnaabeg, Ketegaunseebee, our original ways of knowing, it comes from this place for me right now where I live, here in Niagara Falls. The Thundering Waters is a roaring paradox. She is at once a beautiful, powerful source of mushkiki, medicine, nebe, we say water. Water is life. And yet at the same time, she's an engineered marvel of hydroelectricity and power, and a place of tourism. But when you come here, you can't help but feel the power of her medicine. And mushkiki, how we say medicine, mushkiki literally means, in a translation, strength. He or she is strong. Aki is land, so it means strength of Mother Earth. That's how we define medicine. So when you talk about mushkiki, what are the sources of mushkiki? We need to draw on those sources of mushkiki in order to fulfill the prophecy together. So in this land, there was a treaty, and it was called the Two-Row Wampum Belt, the Gaswenta. The Two-Row Wampum Belt was made of the sacred shells, and you can see here the two columns. So one represents at the time, in the 1600s, the Dutch merchant sailing ship, and the other represents the Iroquois birch bark canoe. Those two vessels are sharing the river of life together. They are in the river of life together. And now, as my Uncle Dan Longboat, who's Haudenosaunee, says, it behooves us to work together because the river herself is in danger. She is in danger from us of destruction, which means the rest of the world is in danger because water is life. Water is the blood. It's like the veins of Mother Earth. In this teaching, there is a sacred space between, or an ethical space in that river. And that ethical space is what I'm going to talk a little bit about. So I wrote an article and published it this year as a student. This was my first article. It's in the Journal of Awareness-Based Systems Change, the inaugural issue, which is a journal that came out of the Presidency Institute at MIT. And I wrote this using the two-row visual code. It's a two-row column technique to help people who are reading, because it's in English, it's text, it's a very colonial format. As you know, academic journals and dissertations, we have to stretch ourselves into this awkward position to be able to write in a colonial way, but at the same time reflect our own worldview. And so I wrote this two-row visual code.
Participant reflection. Writing in a colonial way resonates with me as a white settler editor. After reading elements of indigenous style, I became much more aware of how much perfection and standardization are Eurocentric settler constructs that conflict with the concept of multitude knowledge systems.
And it helps people immediately shift consciousness, I found, because they're used to the standard way of looking at things. So if you take this paper and have a chance to read it, and it's open source, so it's online, I co-wrote that with 4 Haudenosaunee elders, Uncle Dan Longboat, Auntie Diane Longboat, Kevin Deere, who's a faith keeper from Kahnawake, and Rick Hill, who's Tuscarora. These are their teachings, and they're also presented alongside the teachings of Peter Senge, who wrote a book called The Fifth Discipline, and Otto Scharmer, who wrote a book called Theory U. And they're presented together because this is a way to introduce people to multiple knowledge systems. So what we've been talking about today in its essence is the revitalization of human spiritual integrity. This revitalization is really about rebuilding human beings from the inside out. It's connecting that human being to themselves, to each other, to a sense of place, to a physical and spiritual world. And there's a system that is involved, a process to be able to do that. We must restore the sacred feminine, predicated on kindness and compassion, caring and love. That's the real impetus of change. If systems theory and practice can conscience us to that way of understanding the world, then we'll see some really fundamental change. But unless it does, it will be the same old, same old. So how have we been doing that? We've been doing relational systems thinking through the practice of tea, the third presence. Instead of choosing something, the birch bark canoe or the Dutch sailing ship, it's a metaphor for different ways of knowing and peaceful coexistence. And we've introduced people to that by having tea ceremonies and tea sessions.
Participant reflection. I am a person who has long believed in the way a chat over a good cup of tea brings people together. Thank you for confirming and expanding my understanding of how it helps widen and deepen our worldview.
So I invite you to practice a way of reasoning, as so eloquently described by Arkan Lashwala from Peru, that doesn't take sides, but instead dances with two opposites until the presence of a third shows up. And I'm just going to wrap by saying tea as mashkiki. So the reason that we have selected tea as a way of engaging with people, and you might wonder, why are some Anishinaabe people having gung fu cha? We have been taught by Chinese tea masters about the tea ceremony. And the tea brings together the teachings of cultural fluency, so learning from our brothers and sisters in the East. It's a secular practice while deeply spiritual. It brings together water, nibe, and fire. So the men are responsible for fire and fire keepers in my culture, and the women are responsible for water, the water protectors. And together that teaches us balance. And so every day we can elevate a practice like tea to a ceremony, to a place of Zen. And so for us, we have been having tea and a yarn with people from all over the world. And that's how we've been building community through COVID. So apichigo miigwech bizindabiyag. Thank you for listening.
We believe that deepening community is the answer. Reconnecting our communities so that they are strong and resilient is so vital to addressing any community crisis or problem. Cities Deepening Community supports community changemakers to use asset-based community development with collective impact to build neighborhood strategies. We help cities, community groups, and organizations to build their knowledge and skills to put residents at the center of developing a neighborhood strategy. Join us in the movement to deepen community. Learn more at our website at www.tamarackcommunity.ca/Cities Deepening Community. And don't forget to listen to the other 5 discussions on RECONNECT, making your communities essential.